Payment of dividends under US GAAP is most likely classified as which of the following activities? A, an operating activity, B, a financing activity, or C, an investing activity. This is going to be B under US GAAP. Under IFRS, there's a little bit more flexibility, and there's potential that you could classify it as otherwise, but normally it is going to be as financing. And that's really because it's a benefit to equity shareholders. And so equity shareholders are financing the company for you. And so dividend payments to them are going to be considered financing activity. Answer B. AVGI is an American company reporting under IFRS. Its inventory has been bought for $16 million and is predicted to be sold for $31 million. If the net realizable value is $18 million, inventory should be shown on the balance sheet at. So under IFRS, we're going to be looking at the lower of cost, so $16 million, or net realizable value, $18 million. We pick the lower of the two, and so we're going to be going with answer A. This 31 is completely irrelevant here. If these were flipped, if it was inventory bought at 18 and net realizable value at 16, it would still be 16 million. We're picking the lower of these two in every scenario for IFRS. Answer A. Project Red and Project Blue are two mutually exclusive projects whose projected cash flows are given in the following table. So we've got the two projects and the years here. So Project Red and Project Blue have the same outflow. And then Red has inflows of 600,000, 300,000, then 60,000. And Project Blue has the same inflows, however, different order. So these two are flipped here. So we've got 60, 300, and 600. So given this, they're getting the same amount back. However, Project A certainly looks better since we're getting more of our money back sooner, meaning this 600,000 for Blue is going to have to be discounted back by 3 years, whereas Red, it would only have to be discounted back by 1 year. So Project Red is looking better so far. Let's see what the question is. Using a required rate of return of 8% on both projects, the project that will most likely increase value is R. Project Red, Project Blue, or C, Project Red and Blue. Okay, so Project Red is better. However, we want to know which project is going to increase value. So we do need to calculate here and figure out whether one or both of them increase value. So let's pull in our calculator, and I already had the NPV up there, but we'll go back through. So cash flows, I'm looking at Project Blue here first, which is what I have plugged in. So we've got minus 800 outflow. Then we have inflows of 60 for 1 year, 300 for 1 year, and then 600 for 1 year. Go to our NPV, 8% discount rate, scroll down and compute. So we have minus 10.94%. Or sorry, not percent. That's our NPV, minus 10.94. So this one is not going to increase value. So Blue is no good. So since our answers are blue, two of our answers have blue in them, we should be able to go with A. But let's verify that this is a good project. So the only thing we need to change here, we've got that same outflow. We'll change this one to 600, enter. We'll leave that at 300, and then we'll change this one to 60, enter. And we've got nothing else in there, so go back to our discount rate of 8 and compute. And for this one, we can see it is positive. So we have 60.387. And this is really good demonstration of how the timing of cash flows can have an effect. Just by changing that one big cash flow from year 1 to year 3 makes a huge difference in the net present value of that project. And working through all that, we go with answer A, Project Red. Company A is launching a new product with a large marketing campaign that will cost $2 million. To finance the project, the CEO has received the following information from the finance department. So we have required return on equity before tax, required on debt, and the tax bracket. If the CEO decides to sell $25 million in new debt and issue $14 million in common stock, the marginal weighted average cost of capital should be closest to. So let's pull in that weighted average cost of capital formula, or WACC. And that is going to be equal to the weight of equity times cost of equity. We're given cost of equity, which is nice at 21%. The weight of equity, we're going to have to calculate based on what we're issuing. So it'll be this 14 million plus, it'll be 14 million divided by 25 plus 14. And that'll give us our weight of equity. And we see we have that right here. So the weight is 14 divided by 14 plus 25. So it's essentially, of all the new money we're bringing in, how much of that is going to be equity. So that gives us 0.359, and that's going to be multiplied by 21%, which we can see down in our final formula here. And then our weight of debt will be 1 minus the weight of equity, obviously, which will be 0.641. And then our cost of debt, we're given before tax. We need to adjust this to after tax. So we'll do 1 minus the tax bracket multiplied by the 9%. And when we work that through, that gives us a debt cost of 5.85%. So we have debt cost of 5.85, equity cost of 21, and we're weighting those for the amounts that we're going to be issuing. So that's what our final formula is down here. We work that through and we get 11.2889%. And that's going to round closest to answer A, 11.3%. Using Company A's income statement, its degree of operating leverage is closest to. So let me pull in our formula before we dive into all these numbers. Our degree of operating leverage is going to be the percent change in operating income divided by percent change in sales. So the percent change in sales will be pretty straightforward. I'll skip down a little bit to here. We're just going to be using our revenue numbers. So from 2012 to 2013, or whatever, 20x13 or 20x3, we've got 430 and 375. So we have 0.1467 as that number. So that'll end up in our denominator. And then for operating income, that's going to take a little bit more effort here since we're going to have to be working through all these numbers. We're not given that. So for 2023 operating income, we're going to take our revenue. We'll subtract out cost of goods sold. We'll subtract out SG&A. And we're going to subtract out our research and development expense. So that gives us 24. And so anything below here is not going to be operating expense. This is essentially kind of EBITDA, for lack of a better term. And then same thing for X2 operating income, 375 minus 312 minus 36 minus 22. So it's these four top statements here. So then we're going to take this 241 divided by 205, subtract that out, and that gives us our percent change in operating income, which is about 17.5%. And that's going to plug into this formula down here. We divide that by our change in sales, gives us 1.197, which will be closest to answer A. If we rounded this, it would be 1.2 technically. However, we probably just rounded somewhere differently along the way, and this is close enough to be comfortable with it. Answer A. Which of the following is most likely an example of a variable cost? Was it going to be A, insurance costs, B, depreciation and amortization, or C, materials and direct labor costs for a manufacturer? I think you could make the case that all three of these are somewhat variable. As we have more revenue and more business coming in the door, our insurance is going to go up to some extent, and we may need to buy new equipment, which will then be depreciating more over time. However, with variable costs in the definition, the materials and direct labor are going to be much more closely tied to how much we're manufacturing. So if we need to manufacture 2 times the amount, then the materials and direct labor costs for that are going to be more directly correlated to that. Whereas these might shift up a little bit over time if we need to invest more or have more insurance for the amount of business we have. These are going to be more fixed for a period of time, whereas these will be shifting up and down with that, with the demands that we have from our customers. Answer C. Regarding target customers of a firm as outlined in the business model, Which of the following is least likely considered? So we've got least likely, so 2 of these will be considered and 1 will not. So we've got type of price discrimination, target demographic segments, or the target customer segments that will be served. So if we're looking at what our target customers are, I think we could pretty confidently rule out C and B since we're going to be outlining these in our business model. We want to know what the different segments are that we can serve and what the demographics are. The type of price discrimination is more so going to be how we're pricing our products once we've picked our market and segments, and how we can serve those different segments based on different prices using different discrimination. Answer A. Bermu Corporation has the following. So we've got debt to equity, constant growth firm that just paid a dividend of 3.25, stock sells for 48.25 per share, and analysts predict a growth rate of 5%. Bonds are currently yielding 7%, and our marginal rate is 30. Bermu's after-tax cost of capital is closest to. So this is going to be a multi-step question. Let's walk through all the components here. So we're looking at weighted average cost of capital. First thing we can calculate is our weight of equity and our weight of debt within the cost of capital. So we're going to be using our debt to equity ratio of 0.5. So the weight of our debt, what our debt to equity ratio is telling us is we have 0.5 debt for $1 of equity. So if we have $50 of debt, that means we have $100 of equity. So our weight of debt is going to be that $50 divided by the $100 plus $50, since this is the overall capital is the 100 plus the 50. So our weight of debt is 33% and our weight of equity is 67% about. Cost of debt is also going to be pretty straightforward since we're given these numbers. So the bonds are 7% and we need to adjust that for our tax rate of 30%. So cost of debt is 4.9. To calculate our cost of equity, we're going to be using the Gordon growth model. So we're given that dividend we just paid at 3.25%. So that's dividend in period now, 0. We need the dividend in the next period. So we're going to multiply that by our 1.05 growth rate. And then we're dividing that by the return minus the growth rate. So in this instance, we are given the share price and we need to solve for R. And R is what we're going to need for our cost of equity here. So we're given all these variables. We do the algebra and we come out with 12.07% for our cost of equity. That's going to get plugged in right here, multiplied by our weight of equity. And then we're going to add that to our weight of debt times that after tax cost of debt gives us a WACC of 9.6802. Lines up right there with answer B. The expected PE ratio of a stock is 10 and the actual PE ratio is 10.8. What can we say about the stock? The stock is overvalued, the stock is undervalued, or the stock is correctly valued. Well, we know it's not correctly valued because the expected PE is 10 and the actual is 10.8. So since those don't line up, we would say that we don't believe the stock is correctly valued. So is it overvalued or is it undervalued? This is going to be A, overvalued, and we want to compare it to what the market thinks. So if we think it's 10, that means that we think that each dollar of earnings is worth $10, and the market thinks that each dollar worth earning is worth $10.8. So since they think it's worth more per dollar of earnings, that means that the stock is going to be overvalued. Answer A. Takeover defenses are provisions that are used to make a firm less attractive. Which party is most likely deterred by such a move? A, regulators. We can rule that out. Regulators don't really have a horse in the race as far as takeover defenses. They just want to make sure that acquisitions that are happening are going to not make markets uncompetitive or make them into monopolies and stuff like that, but they're not necessarily going to be less attracted to a certain firm because of a takeover offense. And then we've got B, shareholders, or C, hostile bidders. So our answer is going to be C, hostile bidders. They're going to be deterred from these types of provisions, and that's because these types of provisions normally make the company a lot more expensive. And that's why it makes them attractive or more attractive to shareholders. If the shareholders know, okay, if we get taken out, we're going to have to get taken out at a premium price, that's going to be a positive for the shareholders and a negative for the bidders who have to eventually make a return on their investment if they're going to take over a company. So having to pay a higher price makes the firm less attractive. Answer C.